the known universe? And how do we save this planet before we bring our values to other planets? Well, start from the notion that we don't live on planet Earth. This isn't planet Earth. Imagine you're a super intelligent extraterrestrial looking at our planet from a safe distance. Do you see brown Earth? Do you see green trees? We live on planet Ocean. Nearly half the world's surface is unclaimed by any country, to say nothing of the vast three-dimensional space beneath. The next universe is a blue frontier, it's an environmental frontier, and it's a moral frontier. So what if the way to save the ocean is to live on it? What if every baby born added a small improvement to the ocean environment? And what if the wealthier each baby got, the healthier our oceans became? Accelerating the rate by which the poorest billion people became prosperous could fuel a mass restoration of our oceans. And what if floating societies are a technology to liberate us from elections and state politics forever? This image was created by our Dutch engineers who call themselves Blue 21, who plan to put 1 billion people on the ocean by 2050, and we already started in 2019. So I'm Joe Quirk, president of the Seasteading Institute, which is a nonprofit think tank committed to creating startup countries that float free at sea, and I'm co-founder and managing director of Blue Frontiers, which is a startup company which plans to build the first seastead in the early 2020s. And I've written a book with Patri Friedman, the grandson of the Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, called Seasteading: How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians. And here are some images from the book. This is Artisanopolis, based on the sustainable vision of Blue 21, who are authors of the Seasteading Implementation Plan. A beach is the most effective wave break. In this rendition, a buoyant tube. It's like a tube that upholds a flexible hammock that supports sand. And this is designed by the American architect Tyler Kreshover. The deeper and heavier the hull, the more stable it is in waves. So Sea Scraper is designed by the Malaysian architect Sarle Andre bin Sarkum, and it incorporates all the blue-green technologies we feature in our book, including solar, wave, wind power, and it's designed to produce its own food through farming, aquaculture, and hydroponics. And this guy is giving a presentation in Malaysia in 2 days to potentially have a seastead there. I met with NASA engineers who say the seas are a place to practice for space. So they suggested that on a floating, self-sustaining community, you could practice zero-gravity environments inexpensively underwater. If things go wrong, you could come back to the surface, adjust your methods, go back down. So this is Sea Orbiter, a project being developed right now by Jacques Rougerie, a legendary French aquatect, and he spoke at our last seasteading conference, and he provided an illustration for our seasteading book. Here it is. Jacques Rougerie designed this floating city to follow the form and function of a manta ray. So nature has already discovered elegant designs, and humanity just needs to imitate them. And my company, Blue Frontiers, has partnered with the Biomimicry Institute. So Britain's leading space scientist, Dr. Maggie Aderin-Pocock, predicts that within the next century, subaquatic communities will be commonplace. And is this futuristic? A few weeks ago, I Googled Planet Ocean, and I learned about Planet Ocean Underwater Florida Hotel being developed right now. So Mars is in our future, the ocean is right now. Actually, it's our yesterday. My colleague Carly, who's here, got me this picture. My friends at Ocean Builders have already built this pilot project for less than $150,000 and lived on it for 2 months. And they designed this. And they plan to sell single-family seasteads very soon as we get a location. It floats like a wine bottle filled with sand, and it's perfectly stable in the waves. So imagine if your windows looked out on an underwater aquarium. Investors have already expressed interest in an underwater restaurant that floats. And I know what you want to ask about the dynamic of the waves, and here's a video to answer that question.
Seasteading. What about waves? When a wave hits an iceberg, seals sleeping on it rarely feel it move. Floating oil rigs operate on the same principle. The submerged pontoons that support these floating societies are so heavy, workers often play ping pong on the high seas. Buckminster Fuller later specified this deep ballast design for his floating city a half-century ago, later writing that floating cities will hold their centers of buoyancy 100 feet below the ocean's surface. He continues, structural columns rise from the submarine pontoons to support the floating city high above the crests of the greatest waves, which thus pass innocuously below the city's lowest flooring as rivers flow under great bridges. Stability on the sea can be secured not just by building deep, but wide. Kelvin Coe, an engineer at Blue 21, has calculated that if floating platforms are interlinked to be wider than the length of the waves, residents won't feel any disturbance. And the oldest Japanese construction company, Shimizu, calculated that their future floating city will be wide enough to dampen waves of any size. If oil rig workers play ping pong in the North Sea and cruise ship passengers play mini golf all over the world, seasteads can provide comfort for their residents, especially since they'll be built in the ocean's calmest waters. If you'd like to learn more about the floating cities designed by Buckminster Fuller, Blue 21, and Shimizu, read Seasteading: How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Humanity from Politicians.
So, what if the way to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere, restore fish populations to oceans, replace fossil fuels, and adapt organically to sea level rise is to build environmentally restorative cities that float on the ocean? Does this sound too good to be true? I'm going to introduce you guys to 6 aquapreneurs featured in the book who plan to accomplish all these goals at a profit with proven scalable technologies, if only we could utilize the ancient power of the sea. So meet my first aquapreneur. Ricardo Radulovich is an agricultural water scientist from Costa Rica, and he plans to turn greenhouse gas and ocean pollution into food for the poor. His secret is seaweed, one of the most nutritious plants in the world, of which 8,000 species have been counted, none of which have undergone the artificial selection that have made corn, wheat, and soy so tremendously productive. So seaweed transformed the nutrient and carbon pollution we've dumped into our oceans into edible sea crops. So the more carbon algae pulls out of the ocean, the more carbon the pulls out of the air. So you feed the world with a greenhouse gas. And you already ate algae products today in your toothpaste, in your coffee creamer, you eat it in peanut butter, in beer. If you had a piece of toast this morning, the algae is likely in the fertilizer used to grow the wheat. So Radulovich is teaching the poor how to grow floating algae farms that can fit together like a jigsaw puzzle and scale up to any size. And he wants to scale these up, these ocean farms, to feed 9 billion people by 2050. Ricardo's Sea Gardens project has earned grants from the World Bank and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and many people are comparing this to they call it the Blue Revolution of the 21st century, and that's an attempt to evoke the Green Revolution of Norman Borlaug. He's a plant geneticist from Iowa who's credited with saving more than 1 billion lives. So my next aquapreneur has a technology to restore fish populations to our oceans. My friend Neil Sims is a fisheries biologist from Australia, and he plans to feed the world with sustainable sashimi using free-floating aquapods that travel with the schooling fish, recreating conditions in the wild with negligible environmental impact. So imagine fish cages in the shape of Buckminster Fuller's buckyballs. They're untethered, they're floating, and the fish school as if they're wild, and the cage moves with them. And these fish live better than wild. They're well fed, no detectable mercury, no parasites, no pesticides, no biofoulants are used. The Villela Mariner project was named Time Magazine's 25 Best Inventions of 2012, and it's a green, profitable technology for repopulating the oceans with happy fish. And these are just the prototypes you see here. They're already much bigger. So I quote Neil in the book, and he says, quote, "We need to bring together the environmental motive, the humanitarian motive, and the profit motive, so they are not at odds with each other, but aligned with each other." Neil said, "This tech is Seasteading 1.0. The blue frontier is just like the American frontier. First come the farms, then come the towns." So what about our audacious claim that seasteading technologies can replace fossil fuels? The ocean is the largest solar panel in the world. Patrick Takahashi is a Hawaiian biochemical engineer, and he seeks to create sustainable eco-cities using OTEC, OTEC, or Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion, a proven green technology that uses the itself as a solar panel. And this technology was proven to work in the Carter administration, and OTEC plants are being built all over the world right now. And an OTEC representative at Lockheed Martin said, I quote, "Water will be the next oil." So here's how it works. In the tropics, where we're going to start seasteading, the water at the surface of the ocean is very warm, and 1,000 feet below, it's very cold. A 1,000-foot pipe down into the ocean depths, we have a gigantic temperature difference from the top of the pipe to the bottom. And this can drive a gigantic steam engine that can produce a massive amount of electricity. And these cities, based on OTEC, will increase the amount of ecosystems on the planet. So most of the ocean is a desert with almost no plants or fish. And organic matter, it sinks below where sunlight can reach to spark photosynthesis. Sunlight can't get down deep, so there's all this wasted organic matter in the ocean. Seastead farms, based on OTEC, will draw nutrients up into the sunlight, where photosynthesis will engage, and this will create new ecosystems in the deserts of the ocean. Ocean farms, gardens. Imagine if your city increased the amount of life on the earth. So author Marshall T. Savage, he explained the potential for floating cities in his 1990 book, The Millennial Project, and I want to quote from it right now. "When the nutrient-rich waters from the depths reaches the sunlight waters of the surface, it has much the same effect on the barren ecology of the open ocean as the Nile itself had on the sterile sands of the Sahara. Just as the Nile created an oasis which nurtured one of mankind's oldest and most splendid civilizations, a new river of life will nourish mankind's newest and most dynamic civilization." This is the fountain of life on the ocean, and it's not a dream, it's a business. Lockheed Martin said, quote, "Each commercial tech plant will create 3,500 to 4,000 direct jobs." And what will this mean for the bottom billion? My friend Michael Strong is an educational entrepreneur from the USA, and he plans to propel millions out of poverty with what his supporters have called 1,000 Hong Kongs, based on the 21st century's most advanced legal systems. So our current US government was conceived when information traveled at the speed of the horse. Michael wants to provide zones where governance based on 21st century technologies and values can be tried out to welcome millions with blue jobs.
So, once we build seasteads, what about pirates? Well, oil rigs and cruise ships are safe from pirates, and seasteads will be too. There's a flourishing industry of private security firms protecting thousands of ships on the ocean right now. They are far better equipped than pirates, and pirates have never even boarded a ship with a private security team. On top of that, less than 2% of the world's oceans are even considered piracy waters. If crime in Somalia, Yemen, Nigeria, and Indonesia doesn't make us fear all land everywhere, why should piracy in their waters make us fear all oceans everywhere? Consider French Polynesia. It controls a maritime zone the size of, and no piracy attempt has ever been recorded in its waters. If you want to learn more, or if you want to join the first seasteading community, go to blue-frontiers.com and read Seasteading: How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians.
So National Geographic invited me to Washington, D.C. to debate space versus sea. And the debate turned into everybody against me, because I said seasteaders don't need to come your tax money. We can solve problems right here, right now, on this planet, at a profit, starting now. And man, you want to talk about anger. So superstar marine biologist Sylvia Earle sat in the front row and listened to this debate very intently, and I was very intimidated. But afterwards, we met outside and she grabbed a book. Robert Ballard, the famous ocean explorer who discovered the Titanic, he's been called Carl Sagan with gills. He discovered the first truly alien creatures, the only known organisms that don't get their energy from the sun, but from deep hydrothermal vents. He's featured in the Seasteading book, where he pitches a reality TV show with a family on the first seastead with a sea lion as a pet. And not to put too fine a point on it, but I wrote a whole book for children and adults about how our activities on land sea lions negatively. And no, that's not an author photo. So Bob gave this famous TED Talk that millions of people have watched. But he concluded that TED Talk saying, I quote, "Why are we not looking at moving out onto the sea? Why do we have programs to build habitations on Mars, but we do not have a program looking at how we colonize our own planet? And the technology is at hand." Engineer Graham Hawkes invented winged submersibles, which fly the depths of the oceans. And he was a lot more confrontational in his TED Talk. Quote, "For the rocketeers in the audience, your rockets are pointed in the wrong goddamn direction." Then he told Bloomberg Business, "These guys who are going into space, they're 180 degrees off course. Everything we need for our future, food, space, minerals, is in the ocean." Then in Wired, he said, "We're throwing billions of dollars into the void and ignoring a rich frontier much closer to home, Earth's oceans. They're awash with unknown life, unclaimed territory, and immense natural resources. Perhaps the future of mankind isn't out in space, but in our sea." So NASA Ames agrees. Their sustainability watched my video series called The 8 Great Moral Imperatives of Seasteading, and they invited me to give a presentation there twice. They were very interested that algae-based economies, because they were developing algae in space to turn CO2 back into oxygen. So these are some of the folks at their exobiology branch working with algae to turn astronaut poop back into food and fuel. And everybody always asks me, well, what happens when you shit on a seastead? Where does the poop go? But nobody ever asks, where does the poop go when you poop on land?
Seasteading. Where does the poop go? If you love the ocean, you should stop pooping in toilets that empty into sewers and start pooping on seasteads. The flush toilets in your home are basically the same technology Queen Victoria used, and they constitute one of the greatest threats to the oceans, especially since pharmaceuticals can't be reliably removed from wastewater. Chris Canaday, an expert on ecological sanitation, wrote in Blue Frontier's Food and Water Report for Seasteads, Flush toilets not only throw away huge amounts of water, but also all the nutrients found in the excrement. Every time you push that toilet lever, you deplete our agricultural soils and contribute to the formation of dead zones. Since this rich treasure of nutrients is wasted, landfolk must get fertilizer by creating even more pollution, by mining phosphate from rock and taking nitrogen from the air. Why should we get these vital nutrients from unsustainable industries when they are sustainably coming out of our bodies? It is easy to create toilets that are excellent for the environment. The solution is simple: urine diverting dry toilets. Here's how it works. Poop falls into a chamber where it is kept dry and covered with rich dry soil, and after 6 months in the tropics, it stops feces and simply becomes more rich dry soil, which will be used to cover new poop and may potentially become fertilizer on seastead farms. Urine, on the other hand, contains 90% of the nutrients plants need to grow, and when dispersed into soil, it transmits no diseases. And because there is only environmental harm when poop and pee are mixed together, we only need to ensure poop and pee go in different directions. Luckily, urine diverting dry toilets are not a new technology. They were invented in Japan in 1950, and the experience of using one can be just as pleasant as using a standard flush toilet. There are thousands of upscale dry toilets in Scandinavian homes and an estimated million in China. Seasteads will restore the ancient relationship between plants and animals. We give plants organic waste, they give us food. We give them carbon dioxide, and they give us oxygen. If you want to learn more, or if you want to join the first seasteading community, go to blue-frontiers.com and read Seasteading: How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians.
So land-based agriculture and sewage account for 80% of marine pollution. And our Dutch engineers at Blue 21 plan to use algae-based floating cities to absorb coastal runoff and turn it into food and fuel. The Blue Revolution is the vision of Rutger de Graaf Dinther, the first aquapreneur you meet in my book, who said, "Any coastal city can environmentally and economically pay for itself with an offshore floating city." Rutger claims no money would need to change hands. He calls it a, quote, non-monetary symbiotic model. Agriculture can pollute the environment, aquaculture can restore the environment. And our company, Blue Frontiers, partnered with Blue 21 to design this. So Blue Frontier seasteads will empower coastal people to adapt organically to sea level rise. Climate change, these seasteads are better than sustainable. Seasteads will restore the environment. So you build a foundation on land, you destroy life on that spot. You float a foundation on water, you provide a home for a rich ecosystem. Imagine if you could increase the amount of life in the world with every society you build. Eco-tourists who dine in Blue Frontier's underwater restaurant will see with their own eyes that seasteads can restore the environment. Seasteading isn't just an environmental to save the planet from humanity. Seasteading is a moral frontier to save humanity from itself. The Santa Fe Institute aspires to, quote, harness collective intelligence. So seasteaders are here to tell you, you can't access collective intelligence through land governments. Why do humans cooperate? We're not a selfish species, we're a family species. Family comes first. Give me political power over strangers. I serve my family and friends at the expense of strangers. Decentralize power among humans in a voluntary market, and I serve my family by serving strangers. And that's when the ecology of the global brain is engaged, and we all act like neurons in a brain, which is capable of discovering solutions none of the individual neurons can, no matter which ones we vote into power. So the system on your right is as dumb as our elections, but the system on the left is trillions of times more creative than any single brain, and it gave us everything in this room. So hippies, if you love nature and emergence, you should love the market Gaia. The market is an ecology of billions of humans, parallel processing, spontaneously reacting to prices, and exploring possibility space in a decentralized way and peacefully competing for other people's voluntary choices. And Generation Blue is coming of age as the internet is linking up all 7 billion neurons with 1 trillion times more connections. You centralize that process, you shut off the global brain. And the decentralized market Gaia can work on behalf of governance if we unleash it from the primitive technology of nation-state monopolies. Evolution only works if nobody controls it. Unleashing evolution in governance is an ambition of space visionaries. Peter Diamandis, he's an inventor, he's a physician, he's the founder of the X Prize. Watch his Big Think interview. I'm going to quote from it. In space, what's going to happen is the chance to truly explore different societal structures. If you want to practice a pure capitalist state, or anarchy, or socialism, whatever it is, you can gather the people around you who you want to form that type of government and go and create your own society in space. And those who don't like it can duplicate the knowledge of that colony and split and do it again. There will be a Darwinian evolutions of different forms of society. And Peter's co-author, Stephen Kotler, wrote a quote on the back of the Seasteading book, because we say we can do that right now, here at sea. All you need is fluidity. Variation by societies, selection by choosers equals evolution. So the sea is a primal soup where we can unleash what my co-author Patri Friedman called a Cambrian explosion of governments. Karina Schepeska, who's the lead author of our Seasteading implementation plan, she says that floating cities should be viewed as living beings that can grow and change and adapt in harmony with nature. Seasteading is common cause for all ideologies, especially those that have not been invented yet. And instead of arguing about politics, seasteading will give people the freedom to demonstrate their ideas in practice. Seasteading is not an argument for voluntary societies. Seasteading is a technology for voluntary societies. And when we say voluntary, we mean libertarian. Libertarianism is the radical proposition that the values we teach kindergarteners also apply to adults. Don't hit, don't steal, don't lie. Yes, it matters who started it. Just because Jimmy has 3 toys and you have 1 doesn't mean you get to ask the bully to take his toy. Use your words, not your fists. If you don't think this game is fair, you could quit and go play another game. If we didn't agree that these rules are the foundation of civil society, we wouldn't teach them to our children. So libertarianism calls us to accomplish our goals, voluntary interaction, and win-win deals. Not taxation, trade. Not coercion, creativity. Not violent, voluntary. Good ideas don't require force, and seasteaders are committed to voluntary interaction. The system on the left is founded on force. The race to space is founded on force. And Generation Blue has more than 2/3 of the world's surface to create the first nations not to aggress against any people, and the first nations to heal the environment. So I expect young people's seasteads to change the world as significantly as Hong Kong changed communist China, and as fundamentally as the New World in North America changed the Old World in Europe.
Seasteading, for libertarians only? Seasteading is not a plan for society, but a platform for anybody to try their own plans for society. Environmentalists love seasteading because it's an affordable way for coastal communities to adapt to sea level change, and seasteads could potentially be the first societies to improve the natural environment. Conservatives love seasteading because frontiers invigorate traditional values like responsibility and self-reliance. Progressives love seasteading because it's the ultimate means to accelerate progress in good governance. Libertarians love seasteading because it is an excellent technology for creating voluntary societies that don't force others to participate. What makes seasteading different from land governments is that it allows you to create any kind of society you want. When you can float, you can vote by moving your house. This is why seasteading is a common cause for all ideologies, especially those that have not been invented yet. If you want to learn more, go to seasteading.org and read Seasteading: How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians.
So I want young people to stop protesting and start demonstrating their values on their own floating nations. Oceans first, the stars next. And my colleague Laura Tincher made this. I think it's lovely. And how much time do I have? How many minutes? 3 minutes. That's enough to play one more video. Everyone thinks like, well, I can't afford this. Come to our table and meet my colleague Carly Rose Jackson, who arranged my visit here, and I'll be there too, and ask all the questions you want, and we'll answer.
Can you afford it? Startup societies have been making immigrants rich for centuries. Venice, Italy started as a seastead in a marsh. Refugees were tired of war on land, so they built a society on stilts, a startup city-state based not on kings, but merchants. By cooperating to build a new city, they created wealth. Where there is wealth, services are required, and where services are required, people are hired. Seasteads are no different, and the best way to afford to live on a seastead is to get a job on one. Seasteads will need people to manage ships traveling from land with food, supplies, and people. They will need people to cultivate and prepare food, service energy, water, and waste systems, care for children, run businesses, exercise security, and even carry out new jobs that are unique to the open ocean. What made Venice rich was that it started with political independence and access to the sea. It served as the mainspring of modern free enterprise and a showcase for what became known as the Italian Renaissance. Are we ready for an ocean renaissance? If you'd like to bring a seastead to your country, go to blue-frontiers.global and read Seasteading: How Floating Nations Will Restore the Environment, Enrich the Poor, Cure the Sick, and Liberate Humanity from Politicians.
So seasteading is our launching pad to the stars. Thank you for the gift of your attention. I'll see you at our booth and hopefully on the Blue Frontier. Thanks for listening.